everyone! My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are doing something I have not done for a very long time. We are doing an Instagram Q&A. I have not really been active on Instagram for like almost 2 years, probably more than that at this point, and just they really don't like the BDSM and the kink content. I know so many people that have had their accounts just like deleted out of nowhere. And Instagram is how I got started. Without having Instagram, I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. I would not be doing BDSM education as my job. And so I kind of wanted to stay around. So on the very down low, I actually put together an Instagram Q&A. I did answer some of the questions on Instagram itself, so if you guys want to see those ones are like the shorter ones, or like easier to answer, like more kind of common FAQs. That's over, and it's on, I think it's highlights is what they're called. See, I'm not hip to the latest Instagram things, so whatever that is, it's still up there if you guys want to see all of the answers. But today I'm going to be going into the ones that I think kind of deserve or need a little bit more detail, a little bit more nuance, and we're just going to go basically until I start melting because it's 95 degrees again for some reason. So that's what we're doing. We're going to have a fun time, and I'm so excited to get into these questions. So the first one I have is, I'm not going to read the names, it's not going to be anonymous, so don't worry about that. The first one I have says, best impact play toys for warming up and aftercare muscle massagers. So I think I have a controversial opinion here maybe, which seems really weird for the nature of the question. I definitely think things like doing maybe a spanking over clothing can be a really good way to warm up, or even doing something that's maybe like a lighter leather paddle. You want to think soft and warm and slow. Like, you want to do something that's really kind of getting the blood flow into the skin without necessarily being really intense. I think it's a little bit harder to do warm-ups for the back unless you're doing flogging, and then you do kind of more of a lighter flogging, and then you progress into your more intense technique or more intense floggers. But I actually think something that's more important than like a good warm-up toy is warming up into the headspace that you want to be going into, right? It's not just that you start a scene and then you start with the toys and like that's it. And like, you can do, I think especially for like more service toppy pickup play type scenarios, you can definitely do scenes where you just like get into it right away and there's not really a lot of like back and forth communication. But especially if you have more of a power exchange relationship, or role play is going to be a big part of your scene, I think you have to warm up that as well and focus on like emotionally connecting with your partner. Not even necessarily their skin, like in terms of warming that up, but like, gently caressing them or whispering to them, stroking their hair, checking in with them, kind of getting that dialogue started. And it'll depend on what kind of scene you want to do, because like warming up for like humiliation play is different than like a pet play scene. But don't neglect that time to connect with your partner before a scene, and warm up that as well, because especially if it's been a long day at work, a long week, you've had a lot of stress, it can be very difficult to step into that scene space. And if you're only warming up your body physically, you're not necessarily mentally prepared for having a good scene. Now, when it comes to aftercare muscle massagers, and I thought about this before because I read this one when I was getting started and like getting ready to film this. I've never used a muscle massager after a scene, and I'm kind of curious about this. I don't know what would actually happen if you did this, if that would make bruising more likely, because you're essentially like manipulating tissue that's already been like traumatized, not in like a mental sense, but in like a physiological sense. Like, tissue has already been traumatized. That might make it more likely to cause bruising, but it might also, I don't know, it might also not really affect it at all. So I'm not sure. It might actually increase bruising, which could be a benefit for some people that are really into marks. I actually tend to, as a bottom, I don't really want to do more touching on the spot that I just did impact play over. Like, I would actually recommend, maybe if you want to do this, I would do, if you did like a play scene where you were mostly on the back, like do a foot rub. Or if you mostly played on the butt, do a shoulder rub. Do some other kind of positive, relaxing touch that's maybe not on the spot you just spent like 2 hours beating the shit out of. But you know, that's my opinion. Everyone's gonna have something else. But to sort of answer the actual question, I don't have any sort of muscle massagers to recommend, but there's all sorts. You know, you can even use your Hitachi for like the thing it was designed for, not for, you know, genital stimulation. So yeah, lots of options out there. No particular recommendations, just, you know, that's what I gotta say about that. All right, so the next one says, I'm doubting if I'm ace or it's my insecurity about my body that's holding me back. How to, this says defer, so they mean like differentiate. So so asexuality is about lack of sexual attraction towards other people. And if your thought process is like, oh, I'm really into them, but they would never say yes to me. Or I really like them, but I can't say anything about it because they might reject me. Or I'd really like to be intimate with them, but like I don't want them to see my body. If you're having thoughts about desiring a person and being sexually attracted to them, but you are stopping yourself because of your insecurity, that's not being ace, that's having body image issues or having security issues with yourself. So it's about that first step. It's about like, am I attracted to the person? And if you are experiencing sexual attraction, you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I want this. And it's hard for me to describe because I am ace, but my understanding of it is it's a desire to want to physically, sexually interact with someone in an intimate capacity. And that when you experience it, you definitely know what it is. So if you're experiencing that, it's not that you're asexual, it's that you've got other stuff going on. And so many people have body image issues and self-esteem stuff. So I'm not trying to minimize that at all. It just doesn't, for me at least, fall into what I would consider to be asexual, but I think I might need some more information about if it's like you're even afraid to like look at people in that way because of how you feel about your body. So there could be other layers to this, but you know, it's an Instagram Q&A, so we got to leave it there. The next one says, oh, and I really like this one as well. How do I, as a guy, show/reveal that I'm submissive and not the general dominant guy? So I really love this because I know a lot of male submissives really struggle, especially if they're really tall or like military or ex-military. Like they really struggle to correctly get out there and show that they're submissive. And I think one is you got to be in the right environment. If you're going to parties that are mostly, and if you don't have an option, I get it, but if you have an option, if you're going to parties that are mostly male dominant, female submissive, they're very heterosexual, you're going to have way harder of a time being read as a male submissive simply because it's not really like the environment for it. But if you go to femdom parties, if you're a guy there, they're just going to assume that you're submissive regardless of what you look like. I mean, if you go around holding a flogger, wearing a 3-piece suit and saying like, I'm master so-and-so, they're going to assume that you're a guy that's come in and is trying to sort of like dom the female doms, which is crazy inappropriate. So don't do that. But I think for the most part, if you go to the right space, it's going to make it a lot easier, just like step one. I think it's also worth looking into, okay, what are some of the common tropes that you can sort of pull on for male submissives? I think one really common thing is clothed female, nude male is what it's called. So maybe going around at a party, not in public, but going around at a party, like wearing very little clothing. And this is also a reason why I actually recommend, or at least am okay with, people wearing collars that are not like collared submissives. I think especially for male subs, wearing a collar, if it's like a simple leather collar or like a metal chain with like a lock on it, that can be a really, really good way to put it out there that, oh, this person is a submissive, or they're at least a bottom that is, or a switch that has a bottom side that is projecting out that bottom side for right now. So I recommend something like wearing a collar, wearing minimum clothing. If you're into any kind of like role play stuff like ABTL or sissy things or anything like that, you know, wear stuff that correlates with that particular kink, you know, whether that be like pet play ears or a tutu or an adult diaper or whatever it is, like wear some kind of clothing that symbolizes that. Also, there's lots of T-shirts on like Redbubble and places that are like there's one I'm thinking of in particular where I think it says like he told me to make him a sandwich, so I made him a sub, and then it's like a picture of a ball gag. If I can find it, I'll put it on screen. If you can find shirts like that that are like not so subtle hints of like, hey, and I'm assuming you're looking for a female dominant, so I apologize, maybe you're not. But, you know, I think it's, if you're in the gay male community, it's a lot easier to be read as a dom or as a sub in, like, whatever way you want to as a man, because it's all guys. But if you're in, like, the pan or the heterosexual BDSM community, it's a lot harder to be read correctly as a male submissive. So, you know, think about t-shirts like that. Think about things along those lines. And, yeah, just, you know, generally be polite. Be nice. And then if people make assumptions, you know, that might be something where when you're having conversations with people or you're going to a munch for the first time, make sure you bring it up at some point that like, you know, hey, my name's Mark and I'm interested in being a submissive, or I'm actually bottom, because you want to make sure to sort of fight those assumptions as early on as you can, so that way you don't get like typecast as being something you're not. But good luck. I definitely would like to explore, maybe in a video or something, more ideas about how to present as a male submissive. So good question. Ooh, this one I think might be kind of controversial. Do you think it's better to find kink partners or introduce kink to existing partners? So I am generally of the opinion that if you know you're kinky and you have a certain level of kink you want to have in your life and certain particular kinks you want to do, right? Like you're really into pet play. You're really into having a master-slave relationship. You want to have a 24/7 relationship. It's probably better to find a relationship with somebody where from the gate you can have that conversation about like, do our kinks line up? Do our relationship goals line up? And then if they don't, you kind of just say, okay, nice to meet you, and you go your separate ways. But there can be a benefit when you do have an existing partner of that like deep bond of trust. You don't have to go through the whole, you know, dating rigmarole of trying to find a compatible dominant or submissive. But it's so much harder to just meet somebody that you like romantically and you have a good connection with and you date for a long time with, and then add kink into that, because your kinks might not be your partner's kinks, or they might only want to do something in the bedroom and you want to have a 24/7 power exchange relationship. I would say it's like the most common problem I see with people who want to introduce kink into an existing relationship is they both might be into kink, but the degree they're into it is very different. And one of them wants something that's in a totally either opposite headspace where they're really into humiliation and their partner's really into, you know, being a gentle dom. And they just like, despite their romance and their connection otherwise, like they're not really gonna work long term, especially if they're monogamous and not playing with anyone else. So I personally recommend finding kink partners just within the kink community, but it's not impossible to bring someone into kink, but they have to also want it. And that's the problem I see, is oftentimes you get sort of like, especially from the submissive side, you get people that are submissive that are just desperate for their partners to be their dom. And they just like, they can kind of play around with it. Maybe they're into it for sex reasons, but they don't really want to have a relationship based off of that. And they just struggle. And sometimes it works, but I would say most of the time it doesn't, unfortunately. I don't want to like rain on anyone's parade. That's just my observation. Again, it can work, but I think it's a little bit less likely. All right, okay. I feel like I made a video about this, but this is interesting. So what are hints that someone could be kinky? And I have like a series of like 2 kind of satirical comedy videos I've done on like how to tell, or like how to find like an alpha dom, and like how to find a alpha submissive. And I don't really think that there's any like good way to go off of hints, especially because there's a lot of neurodivergent people in our community, and like the subtlety, the hints, the reading body language, not generally a good way to go. Now, it's actually sort of a funny response to that, like how do I show that I'm a submissive guy? Because I do think there are some things you can tell, right? Like if somebody's wearing a collar, unless it's a Taylor Swift music video, they're probably a submissive, right? If they are wearing, you know, a tutu and a onesie and carrying a sippy cup, they're probably a little. If they're wearing pet play ears and a tail, they're probably a pet player. Like there are some broad strokes that you can tell about people, but it's really hard to tell at a glance if somebody is like submissive or kinky or dominant or whatever else. You really have to have a conversation based on that. And so if the goal of this question is like, how do I subtly tell if somebody's into kink? I really think the best thing to do is just to ask people, just be like, hey, are you like, and if you're having the conversations, if you get to the point in the relationship where you're having conversations about wanting to be intimate together, you should probably have conversations about like, hey, like, are you into kink? Are you into BDSM? Do you know anything about that? And then if they're not into it or they don't know anything, then and that's really my advice, is to not rely on like subtle hints. All right, so our next question is, what's some advice to people who can't be openly kinky and subtle ways to do kink and power exchange in everyday life? And I actually did an interview. You guys haven't seen it yet. Well, maybe you guys will have. I don't know when this is going to come out exactly. But I did an interview with the people from the Loving BDSM podcast. And part of what we talked about, and something they talk about a lot in their channel, and not their channel, but on their podcast, something they talk about a lot is ways that you can subtly have power exchange in your life every day, right? And I've talked about this before in my own video, so I'm just going to give a couple of quick suggestions, especially for power exchange. You can wear like day collars or similar jewelry, like an anklet or a bracelet that maybe is even like a normal vanilla piece of jewelry, but that you've decided and put the intention into in your relationship, maybe with a ceremony or a mantra or something. You've said, this is a sign of my devotion to you in our relationship. I am your submissive. You own me, control me, like whatever it is you want to say. So wearing either subtle jewelry, you can also do things where maybe you do have like a daily mantra or like daily ritual, like over text message maybe that you do. You can also do things like, especially if you have like a household you share with other people or kids or something, you can substitute words that you would normally use like sir or master, and then use like sweetie, dear, honey pie, whatever else, and just know that between you, that's your code, where what you're meaning to say is sir or master, but that's not like appropriate in the setting that you're currently in. And then same thing also with like submissive roles or submissive titles. You can use them in the same way. You can also do things like, you can do things that are under the clothing as well. This is more like a scene idea, not really like a power exchange thing. But you can also do things where maybe your like partner picks out your underwear in the morning, and then, no one's gonna know, ideally. Maybe if you're a stripper, somebody would know. But for most people's jobs, like they're not gonna know like what your underwear is. And so you can wear whatever it is that you want. Or again, you can do things over text message. And that, I think, is really the best way to do things in a subtle manner. Please do not do something that will put us all on the 5 p.m. news, because we don't really need that. But it really, there's so many possibilities with that really, it's kind of a combination of making time to be able to spend time alone or go to dungeons, have like date nights together where you can have focused couple time. Then it is also coming up with things and sticking to them and really, really honing in on that intention and that desire to make it something that serves your relationship. And that will take you really, really far. I think even sometimes more so than the more stereotypical things that we associate with submission, like, wearing black lingerie and kneeling and keeping your eyes downcast. And you can have all sorts of other protocols that are more subtle, but this is just kind of a quick list. But yeah, lots of options there. Definitely many other people have figured out how to do that before you. And again, I have an episode where I think we talked about that a little bit. So watch that if you haven't already, or if it hasn't come out yet, watch it when it does. Ooh, okay. I think a lot of people probably feel similar to this. So this one says, thinking about becoming a dominatrix, but afraid of not being attractive enough. So here's the deal. I don't know if you mean in a professional capacity or if you mean in an everyday, like, lifestyle, BDSM community sense, but regardless of what it is, someone is attracted to literally anything about you that you don't like. Or they just don't care, right? Like, for example, I have a birthmark. I don't know if you guys have noticed. I haven't really talked about this. I have a birthmark on my forehead, right here. It has a name. I don't know what it is. It's a big sciencey word. But I've gone in periods of time where I've been more self-conscious about it versus not, because I do think it makes my face look differently than most people's faces. But I don't think I've dated anyone ever that's ever, like, really noticed it or thought it was a problem. So there's that aspect of it. Also, being a good dominant is not about how hot you are. Like, okay, there's some people where they're only, especially for some male submissives, they're really just there for the sex, and they're there to get off and have their wank fantasies happen in real life. And for that to happen, they might be very particular about the kind of person who does that role in a way that I think is probably not to their benefit in the long term. Like, not every woman looks like a fucking porn star. If that's your expectation, you're gonna be disappointed. But for the most part, if you are in the lifestyle, and you will notice this if you go to parties, and I talked about this, I think, in my interview with Justine Cross, the people that have the most fun at parties, the people that have the most play partners, are not the most conventionally attractive people. Like, they just look like everyday people. They might be overweight. They maybe don't really take care of their hair. Like, they might have whatever things that you're worried about that you think are not attractive in you. Somebody that is like a really successful top or dom in a local scene has that exact thing. I promise you. It's about, do you have confidence in the way that you speak to people? Do you have skills that people want for their scenes, and can you actually perform those scenes and kind of back up what you purport your skill set to be? Are you a nice person in general? Are you easy to get along with? Do you have a presence in the local community? Do you go to munches? Do you go to parties? Do you help organize things? And that, I think, makes so much more of a difference than like, oh yeah, she has a really pretty face or is skinny or whatever. Because especially professionally, there are people who can get away with being really shit at being a dom because they look hot. But there are, I think if you're talking more in terms of the actual BDSM community and doing it as a lifestyle, for the most part, the people that have the most success are people that like want to have fun and are open, are honest, and have skills and are there and are present and just like make themselves known, essentially. So, yeah, don't worry about not being attractive enough. The BDSM community is not filled with like exclusively hot supermodels. You're gonna get all kinds of people, including you, and you're welcome to be here, and I hope you are. So, okay, interesting. So, any advice on subspace? I find myself in an unhealthy habit of craving it 24/7. So, I have had similar stories from other people where they're like, I am just like addicted to subspace, basically. I want to be in there all of the time. And like, we haven't studied this. I think maybe calling it an addiction is wrong. I don't think that's really accurate to say. But a lot of people do really, and I think this can happen with lots of things, be it, you know, certain other intoxicating or hallucinogenic substances. Like, people can get dependent on or really, really enjoy being in an altered state of mind more than they enjoy being in their everyday state of mind. I think subspace is one of those things where people really enjoy how it makes them feel. They like being separated from their everyday life or their body, like being disconnected or disassociating maybe even. And you know, I feel like this is something that probably needs to be discussed with like a mental health therapist or somebody, a counselor maybe, somebody that knows about kink and can help you address this, because, and again, we can't have a back and forth conversation about this because it's an Instagram Q&A, but my inkling is that oftentimes a strong desire to want that over and over and over again and like kind of have an unhealthy relationship to it is like escapism from other things in life that are not necessarily being addressed, be it depression, anxiety issues, other mental health things going on, you know, getting over a bad breakup, you know, trying to cope with like maybe a loss, like in terms of somebody important in your life. Like, it could be a lot of things that can cause that desire for escapism and to go to this like pleasurable altered state of mind. But again, I think maybe more of a professional would need to deal with that. But my inkling, again, is that the way that you would deal with this is probably by just like slowly tapering off. Don't just like stop doing any kind of BDSM at all, because you probably feel really crappy, especially if you, and this is the thing as well, is there's peaks and valleys of doing BDSM scenes, right? And that's why we have aftercare. That's why we talk about things we're going to do after the scene, because if you are used to being in subspace a lot and you're doing really intense BDSM scenes to stay there, you're kind of like, instead of doing what most people do, which is like this, where they have the high of the scene and then they have a valley and then they get back to normal life and then they have a scene again and they regulate between when they do scenes. If you're staying in subspace a lot, then you're doing this. Or like this, maybe, even. And the higher the peak is, the lower the valley is. And so I can understand that maybe it's also like, you watched Archer? You know how Archer stays like drunk all the time because the cumulative hangover would probably kill him? I think sometimes it might be like that, where you have to kind of stay in this altered state or do a lot of BDSM to maintain that intense feeling, because if you start to go down, it feels really bad. And you're like, oh, this sucks. I feel awful. I need to do more BDSM to solve this. And it's maybe not even that your everyday life sucks or that you're dealing with underlying issues. It's just that the cumulative hangover of sub drop hasn't hit you yet, and you keep building more debt in that you haven't addressed yet. So I think what you probably need to do is taper off a little bit, do some less intense scenes, not go into subspace necessarily during those scenes, really, really focus on aftercare, and just like prepare yourself for like a really horrible drop and like a week of flu-like symptoms, essentially. That's probably what you're going to have to do. And, you know, if you can afford it, definitely access a mental health care professional if there are kind of more underlying things going into that as well. But, you know, this is why sub frenzy and newbie frenzy is so dangerous, is because when you do play in these areas where you are going really deep, really fast, and you are doing really intense scenes over and over and over and over again, that sub drop at the end is going to be really harsh, and that can lead some people to swear off doing BDSM altogether because of how horrible it made them feel afterwards, and I want people to avoid that. So be smart, pace yourself, don't do scenes every single day or even necessarily every single week if they're super intense, you know? Pace yourself. I got a couple questions about this. So I got a couple questions that were like, can C&C be part of a healthy relationship? How can you do scenes spontaneously in a safe way? And then, can spontaneous C&C be healthy? So I'm going to combine all of these into one super question and one super answer. So one, yes, consensual non-consent can be part of a healthy BDSM relationship. I have taken classes about this. I know people that have consensual non-consent as the core framework for their relationship dynamic, and they have kind of a C&C dynamic on a 24/7 basis. But that didn't pop up out of nowhere. The way you do this in a healthy way is you don't jump into it. You don't be like, hey, I just met you on the internet. Let's have a C&C-based relationship dynamic. No. Especially if you're new to BDSM at all, you go really slowly. It might be a goal for you to reach where you want to do C&C. You build up your confidence. You play together with the person you want to have that relationship with a lot. You learn each other's like nonverbal tells. You talk a lot. You know, you just figure out where your compatibilities are. You develop that base of trust. And then you slowly start to add in the consensual non-consent if you want it to be part of your relationship or trying it out for the first time in a scene. And, you know, again, like I say with anything you're doing that's new, start really slowly, have it be a small component of your dynamic or part of a scene. And what I would recommend as well is have everything else that you're doing in the scene be a known quantity. Have it be things you've done before. Like if you're gonna have a scene where you're gonna, you know, do like a break-in scene and you're gonna like hog tie them and stuff their mouth with their panties and then do all this other stuff, like, you know, have it be so like the hog tie is something you've done before. Have it so like the panty stuffing is something you've done before. Have it so that the verbal humiliation is something you've done before. Make sure you narrow down, okay, all of these components are something that we can do together, we're comfortable with, and we can communicate around successfully. And then you add in the consensual non-consent element of that play, and hopefully it goes well. Now for doing spontaneous scenes, this is interesting because I think the way that I give advice for generally negotiating for BDSM is kind of presuming that the play partner you're with is new, or you're in an environment that's unfamiliar to you, or just like some element of it is new to you in some fashion. Obviously, not all BDSM scenes are like that. Now, with a stranger at a play party that you don't know, I would not recommend doing what I would call genuinely spontaneous play, where there's no conversation, you guys just kind of get into it. It's like a romance movie, you just kind of get swept away in the moment, and suddenly you're bent over a chair and they're spanking you and you're like screaming, you know, bloody murder. No, don't do that with a stranger. And I generally recommend, you know, having more advanced upfront negotiations for anything, including consensual non-consent play, where you guys are working out all of the kind of fine-tuned details and maybe leaving certain things in a known black box, but you know the black box is there, which is the important part, to leave some elements up for a surprise and to make the scene more enjoyable if that's kind of your cake. So spontaneous scenes, I think, are not something that you should really be doing with strangers or people you don't know well, but they can absolutely be fun and healthy with a more established relationship dynamic, especially if you guys live together, if you guys spend a lot of time together, if you've been together for a really long time. obviously at that point, especially if you're really in sync with where both your kinks are, you can definitely play spontaneously, where maybe you go from making out watching a movie to suddenly getting bent over the couch, and then they get out the flogger, and then you're suddenly doing a scene. Well, you can definitely do more stuff like that, but it is a heightened level of risk, and you both have to be aware of that heightened level of risk. And before you start doing random spontaneous scenes, have a conversation with your partner first about, hey, when we're spending time together or at night after work or after dinner, can we do more spontaneous scenes, and are you okay with being whisked away in the moment? And some people are going to be really into that. They're like, yes, oh my God, that's my kink, do it more please. And other people are going to be like, actually, I'm not really comfortable with surprises. I have this trauma thing, I have this, that, and the other. I would really prefer if we talk more before we play. And so again, you know, it's sort of like controlled chaos is the goal, where you talk about it, and you know it's okay, and so then you can execute on the spontaneity, knowing that's something that you guys can do. And then like leave the door open after you do some more spontaneous scenes to renegotiate and reevaluate, like, do we like this? Is our communication good enough to do this? Because I think you have to really, really trust that your partner will say no when they mean no. And when they say yes, it's not just because they're doing it to please you, or maybe you're okay with that. Like, it gets complicated. But you have to have a conversation about it first, is my point. Now, spontaneous consensual non-consent is sort of interesting to me as a concept, because I think you really, like, it can be healthy, but it's healthy in this very limited capacity, where I think you have to have a relationship where spontaneity is known and okay in general. You have to have a relationship where you've done consensual non-consent before and it's been fine, because if you're doing just out of nowhere, no other, you know, sort of information given, if you're just going out there and doing spontaneous consensual non-consent, it might just turn into spontaneous non-consent pretty easily, and you generally don't want that to happen. So in order to do it in a healthy way, again, I'm going to repeat myself, you have to have a more built up, established relationship dynamic. You have to have those other elements be something that you've played with before, and then you can go into, okay, we really want consensual non-consent to be an everyday flavor of our dynamic. And it's not even necessarily that it's like individual scenes are spontaneous or individual scenes are like consensual non-consent. It's that the whole relationship is premised on that. And there will be times where that just kind of happens. And if you like really can't handle that, maybe there's some kind of like super emergency, absolute red, I'm having a mental, you know, issue kind of thing, where you can still use a safe word. It's kind of controversial. I do recommend, especially if you're having a relationship premise based around consensual non-consent, you know, adding in no safe word at all to that as well can make it even more complicated. I would recommend having some kind of like absolute last ditch effort. My communication is not working for me. I'm genuinely having a breakdown. This is causing me irrevocable harm. If you decide to keep doing this, you must know about this level of safe word. So if you're having some kind of like internal injury moment, or they didn't realize that like one of your bones just broke, or you got completely triggered and now you're having like a disassociative episode, or you're about to, or something like that, like there has to be, I think, some way to communicate that is short and unambiguous, because when you are in that moment of like extreme pain or extreme unexpected terror, like you might only have one word in you before you just go over the edge and it becomes like somebody's calling the police type scenario. So, you know, it can be very risky, and that's something you have to account for in this, is it can be very risky, but it can be done in a healthier way. You just have to really, really trust your partner and really know them well, almost in a similar way to like what you would need to have a master-slave relationship. Kind of think about that level of what you would have to have in your dynamic to make that work, and that would be what you would need for more spontaneous CNC. But yeah, it's possible. Okay, I think this is the last question we have time for today. I love all of your questions. I'm sorry, I could film this for an hour probably and still not be done. But the last question we're going to answer today is, how do you tell the difference between a firm male dom and an unsafe, aggressive, and it cuts off after that. I think they probably mean an unsafe, aggressive person or asshole or something. So I really recommend watching my video on like how to spot a fake dom, because that's going to give you a lot of advice. That's basically what I'm probably going to say right now, of how to tell if somebody actually knows their shit. Because an unsafe, aggressive dominant or an unsafe aggressive person that's kind of masking their behavior as being dominant, air quotes, they typically will be very against things like negotiation or safe words or giving aftercare. They will be like, well, I'm the one who's in control, so whatever I say goes, slut. And they'll just kind of like try to steamroll you from the first time you have a conversation, and they are trying. So the unsafe aggressive types typically are looking for one thing, and we know what that thing is. And they are kind of willing to do whatever it is it takes to get to that point. And maybe it's even like meeting a fetish need for themselves, or just like really get off on the level of control that they have. And so they are absolutely against any kind of autonomy coming from their partners. And so they will typically tell you, you don't need to research anything, you know, just listen to me. I know everything. I'll teach you everything you need to know. They will say that like, oh, real submissives never use safe words. Using safe words is a crutch. It's just sort of it's a thing that somebody would need if they're not really into BDSM. Or they'll say that, you know, doing aftercare means you didn't really like this scene. Or if you need aftercare, it's because you're not really into kink. And basically, if they try to limit the ways that you are able to get your needs met or to communicate or to have your own knowledge, they're probably an unsafe aggressive person. And you have to remember that with dominance as well, if they are a good yet firm male dominant, they will want to negotiate with you up front about what that means and what that looks like. Because firm especially is like, okay, am I acting like a mean school teacher or a strict father or a really overprotective sibling? Like, what kind of role are we kind of basing this off of? And they'll want to go over all of the details, make sure that you know what's going to be happening, that you know basic kink terminology, you've educated yourself. They might even give you resources in order to be able to do that with, because they want you to have a good time. And I think the main key difference, besides just like the cutting you off from, you know, resources and things, is, are they a selfish prick? Because if they're really selfish, it's all me, what I want, you do this for me because I want you to do it because I'm the one who's in control, and it's always about them from the very beginning, that is a sign that they're probably really just unsafe and aggressive, and again, are only looking to get their own needs met and are kind of treating you as disposable. However, I think with a better dom, instead of just somebody who's like mean and aggressive, they might, after you've negotiated, act like somebody who's really selfish, and they might want to have a scene or a relationship where it is primarily about them, but they do also care about you, and they want to make sure that they understand what your needs are, what your boundaries are, what your previous experience level is. They want to be in a relationship with you, not just using you. So watch out for people that are always like, this is what I want. And some people, you know, to be charitable, there are some people who get a very mistaken idea about what dominance is, and they think that being a dom is being this super aggressive, never take no for an answer piece of shit, because that's the only idea that they've ever really been presented with. And so there can be people who mean well that are kind of putting on an act because they think that's what submissives want, and then just end up being like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to act like that. My bad, I'm totally new to this. And, you know, that's really unfortunate, but, you know, media, it is what it is. And I will say, on kind of a last note for this one, that one of the other things is, like, can they admit if they don't know something or if they've done something wrong? Because again, sort of the more aggressive, unsafe types will never be able to admit to a single fault or flaw or anything they ever did wrong. And if it was something that went wrong, it was the other person's fault. You know, that last relationship ended, but she was just really such a bitch and she didn't really want to listen to me. You know, if they're constantly putting the blame on others and never on themselves and trying to avoid accountability, not very safe. But if they're dominant and they can admit to it, and they're, you know, even if they play at kind of a high level of BDSM, they should be able to say, yeah, you know, the scene went really wrong. I was trying to play outside my skill set, and, you know, now I don't do that anymore. Or here's what I did to change. Or here's what I learned to better myself for the future. Like, they should be able to not even just admit they did things wrong, but also demonstrate and talk to you about what they did to make sure that doesn't happen again or improve the situation. So, yeah, lots of things there. Again, I do have a video about this that is, you know, more about how to spot a fake dom, but this also, I think somebody who's unsafe and aggressive is probably a fake dom, so it all goes together. But yeah, thank you all so much for your wonderful Instagram questions. Again, I could answer these all day, and I'm gonna cut myself off now, because if I don't, I will just keep going forever because I love answering you guys' questions. If you do like videos like this, I do stream every Friday at 6 p.m. and we do answer questions. That's kind of like the whole point of the stream. So if you haven't checked those out, please do. They're super fun. And I'm trying to think of anything else. Oh, I filmed this with a new camera. I am testing a new camera right now. It is the Lumix GH5 Mark II. I'm hoping that it's better at focusing. I apologize. I'm still playing with settings. If this looks kind of weird or bad or whatever, we're figuring things out. I'm only renting this for right now. I don't actually permanently have this, so there might be some fluctuations in video quality for a little while, but I'm pretty sure I'll be upgrading to this one. Thank you all so much for watching this. Thank you so much for your support. I wouldn't be able to do stuff like this or do things like upgrade my camera without your support. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys have any follow-up comments, questions, anything else you guys want to add, please put it in a comment down below. And if you want to make sure to not miss out on any of my other videos, I do talk about kink and BDSM all the freaking time, and also I do those live streams that I mentioned. So if you want to make sure to not miss out on those, please go ahead and subscribe. And thank you all so much. If you do support me over on Patreon, that is the best way to support my channel is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you guys do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.